Well, good morning, everyone. Let me join my welcome to Stephanie's. I'm Janet B. I'm recovered compulsive eater, recovered from bulimia, and really happy to be here talking about my favorite chapter. We will probably get through about half of it today, and God willing, we'll finish the rest of it next week. So we are starting We Agnostics, which is on page 44. But I'm going to turn the page back and do the last paragraph of more about alcoholism. Once more. So again, they're stressing this to us, like they want to almost beat us over the head with us. Once more, the alcoholic, the compulsive eater, at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink, the first compulsive bite, meaning we can't think our way out of it. We can't remind ourselves strongly enough, like remember, last time I said I was going to eat one, I ate the whole box, bag, carton. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. So, y'all, there goes the idea that your higher power can be the group, because the group is composed of human beings. No other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power, capital H, capital P. They're talking about God. So we're going to flip the page to We Agnostics, page 44. And it says, in the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism or something of compulsive eating. So what have we learned, right? That we have no effective mental defense against the first compulsive bite, and neither ourselves or anyone else can provide such a defense. Our defense must come from a higher power. So that's what we've learned. They are assuming that by now we've taken a first step, we understand that we're powerless, and we're ready to move on. So step one doesn't require that we believe in God. So we're at the beginning of step two, where they're going to start talking to us about God. And remember, the chapter is titled We Agnostics. So they know that I think it was half the people who were in the original group, the original 100 or so, were agnostics. So if you do not believe in God, there's still hope. They say, we hope we've made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. Again, compulsive eater, non-compulsive eater. If, when you honestly want to, you can't quit entirely, right? That when you take one, you have to have many more. Or if when drinking, eating, you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably a compulsive eater. So if you are the way that I was and said, I'll just have one and then I'll stop, but be absolutely unable to, they say, then you're probably a compulsive eater. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. Okay, so they say it's an illness, and that's kind of an interesting word. They don't say a moral failure. They say it's an illness. Well, illnesses have certain symptoms and they have certain means of treatment. So if I have a brain tumor and I treat it with Tylenol, I'm not going to get better because that's not the treatment. So they're telling us for this particular illness of compulsive eating, the treatment, the solution is a spiritual experience. And look what it says, the spiritual experience will conquer it, right? You know, we know the word conquer. It's like one army goes to another village, country, and completely wins. So they're saying when we have a spiritual experience, this illness is conquered. This illness is rendered powerless. So, what is this spiritual experience that we need to have? Well, we talked about it 2 weeks ago, but it's so important. Let's go back. Page 25. The great fact is just this and nothing less. So they are saying that the solution is nothing less than this. It's like if someone had a brain tumor and the surgeon said the solution is I need to go out and cut out the tumor part of your brain that's attaching to your brain so that you'll be able to live. He'll say, nothing less will work. Taking Tylenol won't get rid of the tumor. You may feel better for half an hour, but it won't conquer the tumor. So the great fact is just this and nothing less. So, y'all, we should settle for nothing less. That we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences. Okay, what is a spiritual experience? It's something that revolutionized, there's a word like conquered, right? Totally changes our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and toward God's universe. Okay, how does it change it, right? Does it make me like hate people even more and become nastier than I was? No. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator, so that's one of the names for God they use in this book, our Creator, has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. So that's the change that God is now has entered us. It's like we let him build a home in our hearts. And it's so cool. Like it says, he's entered into our hearts and lives, or he has entered into our hearts and lives. Either way works in a way which is indeed miraculous. That word, miracle, like this is a miracle. He, meaning God, has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. Well, why did I come around here? Why did we all come around here? What's the thing we wanted to do but we couldn't do for ourselves? Stop eating compulsively, right? And I always say that's God's opening act, right? There's chapters in this book, Two Wives, about restored marriages, The Family Afterwards, about restored family relationships, A Vision for You, about building a recovery community, Two Employers, being better at our jobs. This book covers everything. So compulsive eating is the beginning, just the beginning, but we need a spiritual experience. So let's go back to page 44. And they say, to one who feels he is an atheist or an agnostic, such an experience seems impossible, but to continue as he is means disaster. So to be doomed to a compulsive eating death or live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. So a few things I want to point out here. Notice how they say, to one he feels he is an atheist or agnostic. Why don't they just say, to one who is an atheist or agnostic? Well, we'll get to it next week, but on page 55, they say, deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be blocked by other things, by pomp, worship of other things, but it's there. So what they're saying, and look at the audacity of that. You may think you're an atheist or agnostic, but you're really not. I mean, that really like takes some guts, right? But they can say it because who are they talking to? Desperate people who are open-minded. Again, I should stop talking about myself with cancer examples because I don't want to put that out there. But let's say a person has cancer. Normally, that if you told that person chemotherapy is a really good thing, they would say, you're crazy. I'm not interested. I don't even want to know about it, right? Like, I don't know how chemo works. I don't care. But if that same person was told, you've got cancer and the only shot you have is chemotherapy, suddenly they're going to be open-minded. So they are not talking to the people who just want to lose a few pounds. They are talking to the people whose life is unmanageable and they are desperate. I was 23 when I recovered. I wasn't grossly obese. I was about 33 pounds heavier than I am now. But guys, that was throwing up 6 times a day. Imagine if I wasn't throwing up, how big I would have been. And I felt like a walking dead person. Even though, again, I wasn't obese, I was cute, I had boys, I was a zombie. I could be in a room with 100 people and feel like I was the only person on the planet. I could not live that way anymore. So again, they're talking to the people where they're hopeless. And then they say, there's really two doors. One, to be doomed to a compulsive eating death. That's door number one. Or two, live on a spiritual basis. There is no door number three where I get to live on a Janet basis and have the obsession with food gone. There's no door number three. Those are my only options. Well, those are some hard options if you don't believe in God, right? They say, but it isn't so difficult. So they're saying, okay, if you don't believe in God, just hang on. It's not as hard as you think. About half our original fellowship were like that. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we weren't like real compulsive eaters, right? That we could recover in or get better in Weight Watchers or just trying to live a good life and be on a diet. And it didn't work. Say, but after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of life. That's the second time they use that word basis, like spiritual basis, or else, right? Or else we automatically go through door number one, doomed to a compulsive eating death. And they say, but cheer up, right? Because, of course, if I'm just told, if I don't believe in God and I'm told your only solution is God, I'm going to be sad. But they say, cheer up, don't worry. Something like half of us thought we were atheist agnostics, not were atheists or agnostics, thought we were. It says, our experience shows you must not be concerted. You must not be feeling like, oh crap, I have no options. They're saying, don't worry. And then they start telling us things that we may start thinking will work. A mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life. So what's like a mere code of morals? The simplest one I could think of is like the 10 Commandments, right? A better philosophy of life, trying to follow a moral or a religious practice. They said if that was good enough, we would have all recovered, right? If I looked at the 10 Commandments and said, okay, I'm going to see them and do them, they say, then I'd recover. They say, but it doesn't work. These codes and philosophies didn't save us, right? I need to be rescued, like someone in quicksand or an undertow. I need to be rescued. I can't rescue myself. It says, no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't save ourselves. We could wish to be moral. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. Said we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. So I didn't even have the power to live up to my own idea of what a moral good person could be. And I think all of us, if we look back when we were in the illness, or if we still are, and write a list of what we think a good moral person should be, we would see that like we fall short. I still fall short many times a day. So that's not the solution. It says why? The needed power wasn't there. So I didn't even have the power to like keep my own ideals of what was good. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. So again, let's say our cancer patient got read all about how to get better from cancer, what to do, and said, okay, I'm going to do this. Well, if the treatment is chemotherapy, they don't have the power to make their cancer cells stop multiplying on their own. I couldn't change myself on my own. And then for the scientists in here, whenever we want to solve a problem, the first thing we have to do is define that problem. So here they go. Lack of power. That was our dilemma. Our problem isn't lack of a good moral code, because if it was, we could just teach everyone the 10 Commandments or whatever someone thought was a good moral code. They say, no, that's not your problem, lack of a good moral code. Your problem is lack of power. So it's like if I tried to turn my light on, but my lamp isn't plugged in, it doesn't matter how hard I try, my light is not going to go on because it's not connected to the power source. So it tells us we had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously, right? Because if I have, let's say, 3 units of power, and this illness has 50 units of power. I need to plug into a source of power that has at least 51 units of power, right? Because I didn't have enough power. They say, well, that's obvious, but where and how are we going to find this power? Where is this power? And then once we identify it, him, where or how are we going to tap into this power? And then they say the mission statement of this book. Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. I think that's one of the greatest lines in the book. So it tells us the main object of this book is to enable us to find a power greater than ourselves, which will solve our problem. And if we're looking for like clues about God in this big book, so we got one on page 25. They call him our creator. He's able to enter our hearts and live or into our life in a way that's miraculous. He accomplishes things for us which we could never accomplish for ourselves. And here in this sentence are 4 clues about God. Okay. If this power greater than myself is going to solve my problem, this power must have a consciousness. So the wind is a power greater than me, right? I live in the South, there's hurricanes. A hurricane is clearly a power greater than myself. But a hurricane can't think and solve my problems. So this power must be able to think and solve problems. And second, if this power can solve my problem, this power must be smart, right? And be able to figure things out. I have 2 master's degrees. I couldn't figure out how to solve my problem. Third, this power has to be strong. Remember, if I've got 3 units of power and this illness has 50 units of power, then this power greater than myself has to have at least 52 units of power, right? And so smart has a consciousness, strong, and then I think the most important thing, it says this power will solve your problem. So this power, could say, okay, I can figure it out. I'm smart, I'm strong, I can think, but I'm not going to. If this power is going to solve my problem, which this book tells me, this power must care about me. This power must love me. So that's a God I can be interested in. A God who has the ability to solve my problem and wants to do it for me. That's a God I can be interested in. So they tell us this means we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual, right? Which emphasizes my relationship with God, as well as moral, how I'm going to live in the world with other people. And it means, of course, we are going to talk about God. They use the word God. I use the word God. And they say, okay, this is difficult for agnostics. Sometimes people come around and they're hopeful when we talk about their problem. Yeah, compulsive eating. This is why you can't stop. You have an allergy in your body and an obsession in your mind that makes you think you can have just one. And here's our beautiful fellowship. They say, but his face falls when we speak of spiritual matters, especially when we mention God, right? Sometimes people they don't want to hear about God. They say, we've opened a book that the person thought he had slammed shut for good. And it says, we know how he feels. We have shared his honest doubt and prejudice. So prejudice is a preconceived notion about something or someone, in this case about God. It's a preconceived notion about God. So they say some of us have been violently anti-religious. To others, the word God brought up a particular idea of him with which someone had tried to impress them during childhood. So that's one prejudice we can have against God. The concept of God we were given as children or that was modeled to us, right? Sometimes we had parents who taught one thing but acted another. sometimes that was inadequate for us. So it says, perhaps we rejected this concept because it seemed inadequate. With that rejection, we imagined we'd abandon the God idea entirely. I mean, if we're brought up to believe that God is sitting there with a book, and on the left side of the book, he's writing down my good deeds, and on the right side, he's writing down my bad deeds, and the bad deeds outweigh the good deeds, 5 seconds after I'm dead, he's going to meet me with a baseball bat and ignore me here during my life. So they say, well, if we reject that concept, right? Because of course, who wants to live with the baseball bat God? It says, then we think we'd abandon the God idea entirely. But no, that's just a false idea of God. That's just a false idea of God. So we can abandon our false idea without abandoning the concept of God. Then it said, we were bothered with the thought that faith and dependence upon a power beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. So that's a second prejudice we might have. If I believe in God, that means I'm weak. And to that I say, yeah, it means I'm weak. I don't care, right? It would be like someone saying, you know what, I've got a brain tumor, but if I can't operate on myself, forget it. I'm not doing it. I don't want to rely on anyone else. No. So we can get rid of that prejudice. Third prejudice, we looked upon this world of warring individuals, warring theological systems, and inexplicable calamity with deep skepticism. So that's just saying, and that was Bill Wilson's problem, right? On page 11, he says, the wars which had been fought, the burnings. Imagine he'd been in a war and seen like, what, whole towns burned? The chicanery that religious dispute had facilitated made me sick. Judging from what I had seen in Europe and since, the power of God in human affairs was negligible. If there was a devil, he seemed the boss universal. So that's just saying, like, if there was a God, he wouldn't run the universe so poorly. And I mean, we can all see there's like horrible things going on in the world right now. But we can go to God in spite of those things, or we can die because of those things and we won't turn to God. And I think it takes humility to be able to say, God, I don't know why you allow human trafficking and cancer and things like that. But I know, and I've seen that when addicts turn their life over to you and try and work these steps, they stop obsessing about food or alcohol or whatever. So I'm going to trust that. So that's a prejudice we might have. Number 4, we looked askance at many individuals who claim to be godly. So sometimes there's people in our life who claim to be godly who weren't very nice. And we say, well, if this person is a representative of God, then I want nothing to do with God. But that's a prejudice because sometimes people claim to be representative of God and they're misrepresenting God. And we get to have a personal relationship. We don't need to go through anyone else here. They say, who could comprehend a supreme being anyhow? Here's another prejudice. I can't believe in something I don't understand. Well, guys, I don't understand electricity. I don't understand how somehow it gets to the pole outside my house and runs through wires into an outlet into my lamp. I have no, like, how does it get to the pole in the first? I have no idea. But I use electricity, right? I don't need to understand it. And they say, in other moments, we found ourselves thinking when enchanted by a starlit night. We think, who made all this? There was a feeling of awe and wonder. And I think another prejudice is like making things in nature like a starlit night into God. Like, oh, that sunset is God. No, sunsets are beautiful and they're put there by God to point us to God, but they're not God. I mean, I think we can all agree that a sunset cannot give me power. And there's a final reason why I think people don't believe in God, and it's if I believe in God, I can't do what I want, right? Our book tells us the alcoholic is self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. Sometimes it's if I believe in God, I can't do what I want. So it's our job to like look at these prejudices and see which one apply. And then what I tell my sponsees is, okay, once you see your prejudices, like use that good brain that God gave us all and think it through. Think about it. Like, well, okay, just because, I don't know, the nun in Catholic school hit my wrist with a ruler, that doesn't mean there's no God. That just means that that nun wasn't acting in the way that God would have wanted her to. So we think about it. We think, okay, there's all this calamity in the world. How could there be a God? But then that's being so unfair to God because God gets blamed for everything that goes wrong, but he doesn't get credit for all the like millions and trillions of things that go right, right? I wasn't born blind. I wasn't born deaf. I wasn't born crippled. Thank you, God. There must be a God. No, I learned the other day two things that I thought were really cool. How come all the trees don't freeze in the winter and die? Because when it starts turning cold, trees produce a substance that's like an antifreeze. Like, how could that happen? Or, and this one was particularly meaningful to me because my daughter played basketball in school, that our noses have cartilage in the front and they only have the bone in the back. If they had bone all the way in the front, then when my daughter, if she would get hit with a basketball in the face, her nose would break and go like up into her brain. But God designed it that the front, there's no bone, there's only cartilage. So it's like we don't look at those things and say there must be a God. We look at cancer and say there can't be a God. And that's just not fair. That's not fair. If anything else, we have to say it's even, right? There's evidence for both. But I think when we really look, the good so outweighs the bad, even in our own lives. Okay, so they tell us, yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. I'm on page 46. So these prejudices, these like bad things that have happened to us, these doubts, they say, let us make haste to reassure you. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice, so that's our job. That's not God's job. That's my job to look at my prejudices and be able to lay them aside. So I would encourage everyone who has trouble with that to go through those prejudices, kind of talk to yourself about them. And if you're still stuck, get with a recovered person who can help you work through them. As soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power, which is God. Okay, so they're saying that at this point, working on step two, if we work on our prejudices and we express a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves. So we don't, at this point, we don't even have to believe, we just have to be willing to believe. Okay, so how does that work practically? So I think it can go like this, a prayer. And again, this is an honest prayer because we never want to be dishonest in our prayers because God knows when we're being dishonest. So we can say, God, I feel kind of silly because I don't even know if you're here. But if you are here, I need some help. Please help me know that you're here. And I think God would hear a prayer like that. And in the meantime, as I said before, it talked about a spiritual basis of life a couple times. We want to start living a spiritual basis of life. So we think, God, if he existed, what would he want us to do? Well, he would want us to take care of other people, right? He would want us to do self-sacrifice for the good of others. He would want us to be honest, right? He would want us to fix things that we've broken, relationships, if we've stolen things, to pay them back. Um, so we say a prayer like, God, I don't know if you exist, but if you care about me, but if you do exist and you care, I need some help. The worst thing that happens is there's no God and you're just talking to the air in the room. But I believe that God hears and responds to a prayer like that. And there's nothing lost except 15 seconds of our time. So we express a willingness to believe in a power of greater than ourselves, and we get results. Well, what results do we get? That's in the next paragraph. Even though we can't, no one can fully define or comprehend that power, which is God. They are very clear. It's God. It's not a light bulb. It's not the group. It's not a sunset. It's God. Um, and they say, much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. So they're saying it doesn't matter if you're Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, no religion whatsoever. You don't have to take my concept. So they're telling us that. Our own concept, however inadequate, because of course, imagine like an ant, A-N-T, not A-U-N. Well, y'all in Britain call it aunts, but we say ant the same way you say like a little ant that runs around. So if the little ant that runs on the ground looks up at a human being, that ant is never going to be able to understand a human being. And just like us, we are never going to be able to fully comprehend God. We can partially comprehend God. And that's so amazing to me because I never let like bugs understand me at all. I don't waste any time saying, oh, let me stoop down to this, little ladybug or this little cockroach and let them get to know me. No, I don't waste any time on that. But God spends a lot of time on us so that we can at least partially understand his power, which is God. And they say, okay, we don't have to consider another's concept, our own concept, however inadequate, because of course it's going to be inadequate, is sufficient to make the approach and to effect a contact with him. I love that because that says we're not just going to have a belief in God, we're going to have a relationship with God, a contact with him. That's so cool that like God wants a relationship with me. I don't want a relationship with the ants that crawl on the ground, but God wants a relationship with me. And then here comes a promise. As soon as we admitted the possible existence, and now there's two more names for God, a creative intelligence, but see, always said with reverence, capital letters, creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe underlying the totality of things. We began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. Okay, so what's our problem, right? We defined that lack of power. As soon as we admitted that God might exist, what do we start getting? We get two things. We get power, we get an infusion of power, and we get direction, as in, what do we need to do next? Which I think is continue on with the steps till I get to the point where I really believe, right? And power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. So if I just stop with, I'm powerless over food, my life is unmanageable. Okay, now I believe there's a God. Okay, great. I have a little power and direction. I'm going to stop. No, no, no. They say, provided we take other simple steps. I believe we get just enough power to keep us abstinent so that we can keep working and get to the next step. And then another promise. We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek him. The realm of spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. It is open, we believe, to all men. So they use that word seek a couple times there. I remember when my kids were little, we used to play hide and seek. And one time my husband was hiding and my little son said, Dad's hiding in a turkey place. He meant Dad's hiding in a tricky place, right? So he was seeking, but Dad was hiding in a tricky place. God doesn't hide in a tricky place, but we have to seek him. He wants us to seek him. And then, but they're saying he doesn't make it hard. How do we seek him? Through these steps and through spending time with him. I tell all my sponsees that as a requirement of me working with them, they have to spend at least 30 minutes every morning with God in prayer, meditation, spiritual reading to get to know him. Page 47, when therefore we speak to you of God, we mean your own concept of God. This applies to any spiritual expression you find in this book. Don't let prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. So there's spiritual terms that make you bristle. Ask yourself why. Look up those terms in the dictionary, like see what they mean. They say at the start. So again, at the beginning, this was all we needed to start growing, to start our first conscious relation with God as we understood him. First conscious relation, that implies there's going to be like lots more relations with God. And it says afterward. So this is what we can look forward to. We found ourselves accepting many things which then seemed entirely out of reach. So yes, some things may seem hard to believe, like maybe that God cares about me. They say, but don't worry, stick around and you'll get to where you believe it. That was growth. But if we wished to grow, we had to begin somewhere. So we used our own conception, however limited it was. And there's an assignment, I got once from a sponsor, to look for miracles, to have a little notepad with me. Now we could just use the Notes app on our phone, and to take a few days and to look for and write down every miracle that we see. And then we just notice. We don't notice them because we're not looking for them, right? Like the time yesterday or the day before, my car was in reverse. I didn't mean it to be. And there was a car right behind me and it stopped just in time. Like I say, like, thank you, God, for that. Like there are miracles all around us, little ones and big ones, and we only see them if we look for them. So again, if someone isn't sure there's a God, I would say start with that prayer, right? The prayer, God, I don't know if you exist. And if you exist, I don't know if you care about me. But if you do exist and you do care, help me to know. And then look for the miracles. And while you're doing that, live the way you think that God, if he existed, might want you to. So that means, of course, we're not going to steal, cheat, anything like that this weekend. We're going to go out of our way to help other people. We needed to ask ourselves but one short question, page 47. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? Willingness is a decision, right? When my kids were little and, they cried in the middle of the night because they were hungry or needed to be changed or something, I didn't have a desire to get up out of bed, but I had a willingness. I decided to put my will in action to do what needed to be done to take care of my children. So it's a decision. Am I willing to believe that there is a power greater than myself? And if someone is here saying, no, I'm not willing to believe in God, I would say you really need to ask yourself why. It's like I wouldn't say, I am not willing to believe in electricity and use it. Like, gosh, that would be really hard. So I think we have to ask ourselves, why am I not willing to believe in God? What's the payoff for not believing in God? And we should really ask ourselves that. But it says, as soon as a man says he believes or is willing to believe, right? God, I'm not sure, but I'm willing to believe you're there. We emphatically assure him he is on his way. Like, on his way where? On his way to recovery. It has been repeatedly proven among us, proven like evidence, that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. And they say, that's great news for us, for we assumed we couldn't make use of spiritual principles unless we accepted many things on faith which seemed difficult to believe. Okay, so they're saying we can start practicing spiritual principles even when we're not sure about this God thing. So, what are the spiritual principles? Honesty, self sacrifice. And I had a sponsee, Karen M., who went through the big book, and I asked her to look for all the spiritual principles in the first 164 pages, and she did and made a list. Stephanie, can you find it? It's on the Recovery Jam website and post the link. So there's like lots of spiritual principles that we can practice. Let me see if I can just pull out a couple of them. In the chapter, The Family Afterwards, it says, another principle we carefully observe is we do not relate intimate experiences of another person unless we are sure he would approve. That's page 127. So again, a great exercise is to go through this book and make a list of the spiritual principles. We can do that even when we're not sure of God, and we can start practicing them. It says, when people presented us with spiritual approaches, which means trusting and relying on God, practicing spiritual principles, how frequently did we all say, I wish I had what that man has. I'm sure it would work if I could only believe as he believes. But I cannot accept as surely true the many articles of faith which are so plain to him. So it was comforting to learn that we could commence at a simpler level. I mean, I can't look at Mother Teresa and say, gosh, if I had her faith, the faith that she would just like leave everything and, go start a whole new community in the poorest part of the world, just trusting that God would provide the money that was needed. I don't have that kind of faith. And they're saying, we don't have to. We can start where we are. Maybe there's a God. I hope there is, because he's my only hope. And I'm going to start practicing spiritual principles. They're saying it was comforting to learn that we could commence at a simpler level, and we can. And so we will pick up, God willing, next week, bottom of page 47, and continue on with the chapter. But that is all I have for today. Thank you.